Welcome to Beer and Iron's Beef BEERguignon, a French recipe with a hoppy twist. You've heard of boeuf bourguignon and you've heard of beef bourguignon, but you ain't ever heard of beef BEERguignon, and that's what we're going to create today. I still may be murdering that name, and you may even hear me say beef BEERguignon, where I actually pronounce the N at the end of that word. I like that poor little N. Why is it so neglected? This will be a quick video to go along with the article and website recipe, just to clarify a few questions that you will have. Let's get started. Start off with a cut of beef that you would normally otherwise cook in the oven low and slow. I'll give a link as an example on what I mean when I say low and slow. A cheaper cut of beef is perfect. Cut that 3 to 4 pound chunk of meat into 1 to 2 inch chunks. And don't worry with it being perfect. Longer, shorter, smaller, bigger, it's all good. And if you've had a roast in the refrigerator that you've neglected during a busy work week, then that roast will be perfect for this recipe. We bought this roast about 7 or 8 days ago with the intention of cooking it as a low and slow roast, but now we have another use for it. This recipe uses bacon, and not the thin bacon for breakfast. We need thick bacon to create what's called lardons. We're going to cut about 6 to 8 ounces of bacon lardons. Do you know what a lardon is? What about cutting batons? And what about charcuterie? Sure you do. Nonetheless, let's do a refresher. Here's what a lardon is not. Cut up slices and pieces of bacon. Will bacon pieces work? Absolutely. But if you truly want to use lardons, then you'll need to dive in the world of charcuterie. Yes, another beautiful French word for cooking prepared meat products such as bacon, ham, and sausage, to name a few. Baton cut bacon batons. Baton. The B-A sounds like buck, and the ton sounds like don. Baton. These are hard words, and my southern tongue has a hard time wrapping around them. So feel free to laugh at me in the comments below. Baton cuts are usually seen when cutting vegetables or root vegetables. Root vegetables are often prepared this way. Before the baby carrot, do you remember when veggie trays had those square cut, rectangular cut carrots? That cut is known as the baton cut, and it's a process that we described as baton. It's not how to make baton cuts, but how to baton. The cut vegetables or meat is cut this way, and the cut vegetables or meat that we cut this way are known as batons. So when you baton bacon, you're actually making bacon batons. You get it? And since we're talking and cooking French stuff, baton comes from the French word batonner. After all, what else do you know that's been baton? How about French fries? Did I just blow your mind? French fries are cut into little sticks, known by the French as bâtonnets. Again, laughing at poor old Soule's pronunciation of these words in the comments below is much appreciated. I'm an Idahoan of 20 years and I grew up in Louisiana. I don't know what language I speak anymore. Folks up here say I got an accent. I ain't got no accent, I talk just fine. Well, forgive the rabbit trail. Back to our baton cut bacon batons. We're going to render the fat from this baton to sear our cut beef in. This is how you baton cut bacon batons. You need thick bacon. Ask your butcher for some. If there's no thick bacon to be had, then consider pancetta. Pancetta is salt-cured pork belly meat. Just watch the salt you add to this recipe if you use true pancetta. Cut the bacon into batons that are about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch thick and about 1 inch long. These will brown beautifully as the fat is rendered and then available to sear your beef in. And those little pieces of bacon will be like flavor bombs at the dinner table. Now, will we add all this bacon? No. We're just going to add some of it. After you baton cut the bacon batons, set them aside. There's not many ingredients for this recipe. 3 to 4 pounds of beef, 6 to 8 ounces of whole unsliced bacon, 1 medium onion, 3 large carrots, sliced thick, 2 to 6 cloves of garlic, 1 to 3 tablespoons of tomato paste, 2 to 3 tablespoons of flour, 2 to 4 bay leaves. We're going to use some thyme, sage, and create a little bouquet. Or you can use the dried equivalent. At the end, we're going to add 10 to 15 pearl onions, about 8 ounces of whole mushrooms or more, and we're going to use 12 to 16 ounces of beer or more. We're going to have some beef broth on the ready to top things off if we need to, and we're going to salt and pepper to taste. I'll add as I cook. Let's make this. First, finely chop your onion. Then your garlic. Peel 3 large carrots and thick slice them. You see here I'm using 4, 3 or 4 or more. Who's counting, right? Thickly slice those carrots into chunks about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch long. We want thick carrots because they're going to be in that cook the whole time. Add 2 to 3 tablespoons of flour to a bowl and then add a bit of broth to mix things together. What we're shooting for here is to mix that flour up in that liquid so we don't end up with chunks of flour in our pot. Measure out 1 to 3 tablespoons of tomato paste. Yeah, we're going to be cooking in cast iron with tomato paste. It's a-okay. For later, we have our mushrooms washed and ready. And our pearl onions are prepped and ready as well. You can use frozen pearl onions, but it won't be as delicious as these fresh ones. But don't think that my saying that means that those frozen ones won't turn out delicious as well. They'll be a-okay. Now, traditionally, this recipe calls for a red wine, hence the name BEERguignon, with the Bouquet meaning Burgundy, Burgundy wine, red wine. We're going to cook this with beer, and not just any old ale or lager either. We're going to create it with a sour ale. There's so many to choose from. Cherry or berry-based sour will work perfect. I've had this peach Belgian sour ale in my beer fridge for some times. It was beautifully crafted by a local brewer here in northern Idaho called Laughing Dog. It's called DONEness Hund. That's Dutch for the 8th dog. The Dutch folks, they know beer. And them French folks, they know wine. And here we are mixing up a French-inspired recipe with a Dutch-inspired beer in a cast iron Dutch oven. How cool is that? We're using a sour that's made with fruit because I feel it closely represents wine being made from fruit. It's as close to wine as a beer can get as far as I'm concerned. This is a peach sour, and will our beef BEERguignon taste like peaches? Nope, not a bit. Now for the Herb Bouquet. Get a bit of butcher's twine. Get a bit of sage and thyme. You can use other herbs if you like. Just tie them together. Later, you're going to fish this little bouquet out. And I often don't tie it tight enough and it falls apart during the cooking. Tie it tight. The tighter the better. Most of that herb bouquet will nearly dissolve by the end of this cooking time. We're using a 7-quart cast iron Dutch oven. There really isn't a specific size to use for this recipe. The size of your Dutch oven depends on your ingredients. If you have a lot of ingredients, use a bigger pot. If you have less ingredients, use a smaller pot. Toss in some, but not all, of those bacon lardons over medium-high heat in that Dutch oven. Sear them up good. That fat will render, and so will the smoke. Keep that range hood on high. We keep the lid of our cast iron Dutch oven right nearby to place our bacon lardons and our seared beef as we do this in batches. Now set that raw beef in that hot pot of bacon fat and sear each piece real well. This is the most time-consuming part of this recipe. Be patient and go slow. The searing and charring is what will really give this recipe a wonderful flavor. We'll keep going until all the beef is seared. And if our pot gets a bit too dry on the oil, we'll sear some more of those bacon lardons and render the fat from those as well. Nothing here is fully cooked. We're just rendering fat and searing beef. So my suggestion is not to sample the goods. Though I'm going to say that licking your fingers when no one's watching, hey, that's okay. Privileges of being the chef, right? This is what seared beef should look like. See all the residue in the bottom of that pot? Yeah, that's flavor right there, I tell you what. Don't wipe it out. Leave it. We're going to deglaze the bottom of that pot with our onions and garlic. Toss the onions and garlic in that pot and saute it until the onions become translucent. Not so translucent that you can read newsprint through them, but good enough. Then you're going to add your carrots and saute that for a bit. Just a bit. These carrots will nowhere near cook. Just saute them for a bit. Then add all the beef and only some of the bacon back to the pot. The lid will have a bit of broth after you move all that meat back over into that pot. Pour that liquid in the pot. Next, add the beer to the pot before you add any other liquids. We want the beer to be the main thing here. We'll add some beef broth only to bring the liquid up to level if we need to. We'll also use some of that broth as this recipe cooks down and thickens up. Next, add your flour mixture. Get it all. And then add the tomato paste. I see a piece of beef escape that pot over there. You see it? And then add the broth. All or less. Just up to the level or a bit below the level of the beef and other ingredients. You want to see the beef still poking its little head out the top of that liquid level. We want a stew and not a soup. Give everything a good stirring up. Our ingredients will settle down a bit, but they're still going to be above the level of the liquid. That's perfect. Get the pot simmering and then add your herb bouquet. You can add dry herbs or chop fresh herbs if you like. Did you know that bouquet is an old French term for clump of trees? Kind of like an old English term describing a donkey or describing me on a bad day. Let all of this simmer for a bit. And don't forget the bay leaf. After the stew has been simmering for a bit and all the flavors are becoming more familiar with one another, it's time to check for the saltiness. We'll check the saltiness every 20 minutes or so until we get it right. Get a regular spoon. Spoon out just some of the broth, nothing else. Taste it. If the salt is perfect like you like saltiness to taste, then rock on. If you need to add some, only add a teaspoon of salt or less at a time. I will often pour the salt in the palm of my hand to train my eyes and my hand to better identify what a teaspoon of salt looks and feels like in my hand. I fancy myself being able to perfectly measure things from my palm, really. Put the lid back on the pot and leave some room. Even on low heat, that stew will find a rolling boil with that heavy lid holding in all that steam. We want a nice slow boil, letting some of the heat and steam from the pot escape. If the lid is off altogether, it will not boil well enough. This is going to cook for an hour to 3 or longer. When you want to check for doneness, pull out a bigger piece of beef and see if it cuts with a fork. Let it cool a bit before you sampling it. How does it chew? Is it ready? That's up to you and your preferences. I like tender, tender, tender. And if I'm pressed on time, I don't care. I don't rush this process. Always low and slow until fork tender. There's no other way to do this. And don't forget to fish out that herb bouquet or what's left of it. If you've been enjoying this recipe thus far, consider hitting that little thumb and maybe selecting that little subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that little dinner bell. Now it's time for the pearl onions and the mushrooms. We'll add them at this point so we don't cook them to a mush during the long cooking process. A cast iron skillet will work perfect for onions and mushrooms. Add a bit of butter to the pan. Start with the onions. They'll take the longest. Let them saute, even char a bit. Then add those mushrooms. If things are too dry here, you can add some broth, water, or maybe some leftover beer if you held any back. Once they're done to your liking, add them to the pot of stew. all you have to do now is serve it up. I love, love, love this recipe with some mashed baked potatoes with the skin still on. Just put some mashed potatoes in the side of that bowl and add the beef BEERguignon to the other side of the bowl, and then just garnish it with this or that. After that, enjoy your meal. But since we're cooking all French-like, bon appetit. Well, that's about it, y'all. You all take care and keep on cooking in those cast iron beauties. And keep on enjoying those frosted glasses full of that fermented barley pop. We'll see y'all next time on BeerandIron.com.